Apparently I woke up today and chose violence because we are about to rank all of the musical theatre shows that I've seen, whether it's here in London in the West End or if it's been in the US. Anything that I've seen that I can remember, I've got in a list at the bottom of the screen here, and we're going to be putting them in order, ranking them from best to worst. But we're mixing things up a little bit. We're adding some spice into the equation because I am only allowed to pick 3 things, tops, no more than that, to go into this little S tier category, and I'm going to force myself to put at least 3 things into this overrated category. So we're going to be throwing out some shade right now, and I apologize in advance because it's going to be ruthless, but these are the rules of the game. So let's begin. At random, I'm going to pick Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie and Clyde is one of my favorite musicals of all time. I absolutely loved it at the Arts Theatre last year. Saw it there multiple times. Have also seen it multiple times at the Garrick. I don't think it's quite as good at the Garrick just because of how much less intimate it is, but I still absolutely love the show. So this is an S tier contender, but for now, it's going in A. Big fan, but I've got to pick my battles. I've only got 3 that I'm allowed to put in there. Next up, Choir of Man. This I saw a couple of years ago now inside a giant purple cow. I know that probably sounds a little odd, but it's some kind of pop-up festively thing that happens in London. I forget its name, but Choir of Man was basically performing inside that. So I haven't seen it in a theatre scenario ever. I've only ever seen it in a cow. And to be honest, my memory of it is a little hazy, but I thought it was kind of fine. I didn't particularly love it. I didn't particularly gel with it, but at the same time, I don't think it did anything particularly wrong. So I'm not sure I would say it's overrated or C tier. I'm going to put it middle of the pack for now in B, but we'll see if that changes as things move forward. Next up, this is going to be controversial, okay? So we're going with Hamilton next. The problem I have with Hamilton, but before you click off the video, please hear me out, okay? Is that the musical itself, right? I love the music. I love what Lynn has done with just the writing and all those sorts of things. But when I went to see Hamilton, I was in LA, which straight off the bat, you might say is not theatre territory necessarily, but I was in LA and I paid through the nose for these tickets. It was so hard to get cheap tickets for the show. I went with one friend who was familiar with the musical and another who didn't really know it at all. He just knew that he liked musicals, but he didn't know Hamilton. And there were 2 main issues, which were sort of the same issue. Issue number 1 was that it was really difficult to actually make out what people were saying. I don't think it was the diction of the cast. I think that just the sound in that theater was a bit messed up. And so the guy I was with who didn't really know Hamilton the musical, but just knew a bit of history, was really struggling to follow along with it because he couldn't hear what people were saying. And second was the fact that just the sound in general wasn't as good as it is here in the West End. I don't know why that's the case. You're going to see that come up with a couple of other shows that I've seen in the US, but for some reason, the sound out there in LA theaters especially just wasn't up to par. So as much as I love Hamilton, what I saw of Hamilton wasn't nearly as good as like the pro shot, for instance. And I'm not rating the pro shot here. I'm rating what my eyeballs saw that day, and my earballs, I suppose, too. So horror of horrors, we're actually going to plonk Hamilton for now in the B tier. But again, things may shuffle around as we go, okay? I can already tell this is going to be a criminal list. Like, reprehensible choices are about to be made. So next up, let's go Tammy Faye. So this one was a real surprise. I managed to get last minute tickets to it at the Almeida, and it's one of my favorite musicals of all time now, but there's no soundtrack, there's no cast album on Spotify, there's nothing I can freaking listen to engorge myself with this wonderful music and just this joyous production. And it drives me insane. Please, Almeida, give us what we want. We need a Tammy Faye cast album. There have been other productions of Tammy Faye in the past, but this one was the Elton John soundtrack, and it was just, absolutely incredible. It's going in S tier for now. It's our first S tier contender. Next up is Cages. Now, I debated whether or not I should put this in this list. I don't know if technically you'd actually call it a musical. It's this weird fusion of genres. There's a huge amount of video. There's also a huge amount of just projection stuff going on. And so I've included it just because I think it's interesting to raise the point of like, is this even a musical, guys? I mean, what do you think? But I went to see it expecting it to be a lot more like a kind of punch drunky experience for some reason. I'm not sure why that's what I had in my head, but I got to I forget the name of the studio. It's that Doctor Who studio. Is it Riverside Studios? I got there, they scanned my ticket and they were like, okay, yep, here you go. You're sitting at the very back in the corner. And I was like, wait a minute, I specifically paid for a ticket that was front row because I was really excited to see what kind of immersion was going to happen in the show, and I wanted to be as up close as possible to that. Turns out there was some kind of booking issue. I don't know, their system just messed up or something, but very kindly, the person at the box office put me basically smack bang in the middle of the show, and I'm so glad they did, because at the sides it was so much worse an experience. Like, you really need to be dead center for that because the projections work differently depending on your viewing angle. But then I get there, I sit down, I'm ready to be blown away by this, and I'm not gonna lie, I thought it was really tacky. It's trying to do a lot of cool things, but I think it's almost one of those scenarios where they realized they had the technology to do something cool, but they didn't necessarily stop and ask whether they should. They just went along with it because they could. So Cages, I give you points for creativity. I give you points for trying, okay? But I'm unfortunately gonna have to put you down here in the overrated tier. I'm so sorry. It just wasn't for me. I didn't really like the music. It was very poppy, but not poppy in like a Heather's way or something. Just poppy in a no. So speaking of, let's do Heathers next. Heathers, I really enjoyed. I think Heathers has some fantastic music in it. And I was also front row for this, managed to get front row. I think I might have Today Ticks rushed it or something, I can't recall. But I had a really, really good time. I wouldn't say that I like it as much as Bonnie, and I've only seen Heathers once, whereas Bonnie I've seen multiple times. But for now, let's put Heathers into the A tier. I just had a great time there. Next up, 101 Dalmatians at the Regent's Park Open Air Theatre. This was weird, man. It was really strange. It was advertised very seriously. Like, it was as if they were trying to appeal to a bit more of an adult audience. I thought we were going to be getting a bit more of a mature 101 Dalmatians. But then the show itself was very much for kids, or at least it had that air to it. And I just wish that they'd leaned into that more with the marketing. It felt like a real clash and a missed opportunity. And because they did some poor expectation setting, it meant that I enjoyed it less than I think I might have done had I gone in with the expectation of it to just be a sort of silly couple of hours. And they also just ran into a load of areas in terms of writing about influences and things like that get very cringe very quickly. Like, when you have a writer that's written a production like this and they're talking about like being #blessed and all this sort of thing, it so quickly leaves reality and leaves the sort of sphere of how people actually talk and goes into parody. But then the parody itself isn't actually being a parody. It's not finding a joke there. It's just saying, look, this thing is dumb. And I just didn't really connect with that. I thought it was silly in a way that I wasn't expecting. Again, perhaps if my expectations had been managed differently, then I would have enjoyed it more. But sadly, this one is going in the C tier for me. Next up is Standing at the Sky's Edge. Oh my goodness. I was crying my eyes out so embarrassingly much at the end of this show, but it wasn't embarrassing at all because every single other person around me was doing the exact same thing. It's a triumph, this musical. It's so nearly perfect. I think its only flaw is that it's still sort of technically a jukebox musical, and so the specificity of the songs in certain areas is a little lacking. Like, you can only say, open up your door a certain number of times in a song before you start to realize that it's a generic line as opposed to something that was written for the musical specifically with the musical's character names in it, etc. So it's S tier contender for me, but that one teeny tiny point may be the decider between whether or not it's going to end up maybe dropping down to A tier. But I really truly was blown away by Standing, so for now it's a really strong S tier contender. The Drifter's Girl next. I thought The Drifter's Girl was a lot of fun. I went in knowing nothing about it, and I actually managed to catch it on its final night. It was closing night, which changes the experience a bit because you had moments where people were singing along, they were clapping along, like there was a lot of joy in the theater because clearly a lot of people loved the show. And there were family and friends and stuff there that night. And while I definitely did have a good time, I sort of had that experience where almost like you see a film that's a solid sort of 7 out of 10, and you think to yourself, wow, okay, yeah, I had an entertaining evening tonight, but then you don't think about it too much beyond that. And that's kind of what's happened for me with Drifter's Girl. I've thought about it a couple times in my conversations with, for example, people talking about Bonnie and how I wish at the Garrick they staged things a little differently just to fill that massive stage a little better, which I thought the Drifter's Girl actually did really well. But other than that, I don't know. It just hasn't really returned to me. And as such, I think I'm going to keep it here in the B tier for now. From the bottom right of the screen here, gone but not forgotten, Dear Evan Hansen. I saw this one twice. I think I saw it last year and then maybe a month or so before it closed, or maybe even just a couple of weeks before it closed this year. And the show's a ton of fun. The music is just so wonderful. It's so catchy, so earwormy. But the writing of the show, I think, like the story of the show, doesn't particularly do it for me. Like, I don't get to the end going, man, I've been brought on a real roller coaster of a story here. I more so get to the end and think, wow, there were a lot of bops in this, but Evan's kind of an arse and he kind of just gets away with it. So I don't know. It's certainly not S tier for me. It's good, don't get me wrong, but I'm also not sure if it's A tier. I think I'm going to put it A tier for now, but we'll see. I don't want to have this A tier too crammed. Next up is 6. Please do not crucify me for what I'm about to say. So like I said, I am judging here based on the experience I had on the day at the show, okay? Like Standing at the Sky's Edge, for example, the National Theatre's lighting system went down, and so we had this really unique experience where the lights slowly came back online as the show progressed. It was a one-off, it will never happen again. It was bizarre, but the fact that they kept going, they pushed through that, and they worked so hard to still put the show on for everyone, endeared me to them even more. Like, it gets even more points for that. It wouldn't normally get those points if I was looking at this just from a critic's point of view, but I'm not. Today, I'm looking at the experience I had, and the experience I had watching 6 was so bad. It was at Hampton Court Palace. I had what I thought was a pretty good seat, and I got there, and I sat in my little chair, and what did I realize as soon as I sat down? I was a fool. You see, Hampton Court is not designed to put on shows. And so as I sat down, I discovered that the stage was so high that I could only see about from the sort of navel up if people were at the very front of the stage, and if any of the queens were even just a little further back on the stage, all I could see was about halfway up their face and up. The stage was that high that it was cut off and I just couldn't see it. And it was my first time seeing 6. So a really, really unfortunate kind of moment where I was like, well, a lot of the music in this show is really fun, but I'm getting nothing from this performance. Absolutely nothing at all. And so I know it's a crime, but that performance of 6 at Hampton Court that was hyped up and it was sort of meant to be this real celebratory moment, the experience for me was not good. So unfortunately, it's going down here. Any other time, okay, if I go see it at the Vaudeville, I'm sure it'll be higher up. But at Hampton Court, in that seat, I wasn't even really seeing a show. I was just hearing one. And the sound in Hampton Court is really bad as well. Obviously, it's not a theater. So it was just a double whammy, man. A really unfortunate first viewing of 6, to be honest. Next up, let's save you for later. Let's do HadesTown. I've seen HadesTown twice. Both were, again, in LA. And it's an unusual one because I'd waited quite a long time to see HadesTown and to actually listen to the music. I'd held off from listening to it on Spotify because I knew that the source material was something I was really into. Like, I love Greek myths, I love mythology, all that sort of stuff is just chef's kiss. Why was that like chef's bite? Like, that was weird. So I went in completely fresh, but knowing I was sort of primed for a good time. But again, LA theater meant bad sound quality. For some reason, I don't understand why this happened so frequently out there, but it did. It wasn't the worst. Like, of all the other stuff I saw in LA, I think that this was probably the most passable, but still, there were moments where it felt like I could hear peaking on the sound system. It was just strange. I don't get it. But I still had a wonderful time, and I went back and I had a slightly different seat, and the sound was improved there, and the experience was improved as well. I was a bit closer. But it's an unusual show because it's so different to basically everything else we've got here. Like the style of the music and the way the story interweaves with the music and the way so much of the story is sung, in a sense, it's an unusual one. And I kind of give it points for that, but simultaneously take some away. Like, it doesn't have that sort of mass appeal kind of soundtrack, but then at the same time, I still had a really good time. I still really enjoyed it. So yeah, let's put it in A tier. It's a tentative one, but let's put it in A tier. Okay, next up, The Lion King. Now, I don't know if this is going to be controversial because I'm pretty sure this show makes more money than any other show on the West End, just based alone on the fact that they seem to advertise more than any other show on the West End. Like, if they've got the budget to spare, that must mean that they're raking in the cash, or at least I assume so. However, I personally don't get it. The Lion King has 2 good songs, and the rest of the show is just mid. That's the police coming from me right now. I don't know if that's coming up on the mic or not. But seriously, I cannot for the life of me understand why people love The Lion King. The story isn't captivating. The soundtrack goes completely dead after about 15 minutes in because they got their 2 good songs out of the way. And you're just sort of left sitting there going, okay, yeah, things are happening in front of me. And it's no fault really of the creatives involved in the show, I don't think. It's just that the writing just doesn't do it for me, and I don't like the songs. So I'm sorry, but you're going in the overrated tier, mate. I have no idea if that's controversial. Maybe everyone loves that show. Have I just committed a criminal offense? I don't know. Next, let's do Come From Away. Come From Away was so much fun. What a wonderful show, and what a joyous... Oh, I just realized I forgot to add Bake Off here. Come From Away was so joyous. It was a really great time. The reason that I just thought about Bake Off just then is that one of the guys that was in Bake Off had really strong Come From Away energy. He just felt like he would have fitted in so perfectly into Come From Away. So that's what triggered the thought. But Come From Away itself, I adored. I thought it was so good, so wholesome. So that one's going in A tier, no hesitation. Next, let's go for Legally Blonde. I think my interpretation of Legally was that it's a perfectly good show. I saw it at the Regent's Park Open Air Theatre, but it's not necessarily for me. And what I mean by that is not that I think that sort of the genre is not something I would like. I just think that in this instance, the songs don't slap in the way that I want them to. Like, maybe to kind of defend myself here from any critique that you guys might be giving me, I've already listened to the Mean Girls soundtrack on Spotify a bunch and am infatuated with that soundtrack. There are some serious bangers in there. So if that's an acceptable kind of nearest neighbor in terms of theme and genre, which I'm hoping it kind of is, then that hopefully gives you an idea of the fact that I'm not just hating on it because it's Legally Blonde. I'm just saying that for me, the songs just aren't the sort of big numbers that I wanted them to be. There was one song, I forget exactly which one it was. It was like a fitness instructor. She was like doing a load of skipping or something during it. And the athleticism and the physicality of that performance is what's saving this from being a C tier for me. It's going in the B tier. It was a really great performance, that moment where she was doing that skipping thing. But yeah, for whatever reason, it just didn't connect with me in the way that I was hoping it was going to. Next, let's do Poppins. This is an unusual one. I thought this show was going to be quite different to what it actually was. I've seen the Mary Poppins film a bunch growing up, and it was a fairly big part of my childhood, I'd say. But the stage show was just very different. It didn't feature any penguins, and that alone was a terrible surprise for the sort of child me that still inhabits my body to this day. It was good fun, but again, some of the songs really just didn't work in my opinion, and it was the sort of thing that I've seen once and I know what it was now, but I don't think I would ever be inclined to really see it again. It's probably a really good show to bring kids to, but then at the same time, there's that weird bit where what is it? Is it a clown or something? Is like over the house and it's all really, I don't know, it's terrifying. So I don't know what to do with you, Mary Poppins. I forget her name, but the woman that was playing Mary, she was really wonderfully fantastic. Like, she was really good at the role. So maybe we'll just sort of drop you here in B. Gonna have to shift things along a bit because I'm putting so much in the B tier. I'm so sorry. It's the sort of thing that could have actually ended up going to C for me, but I had a slightly better time than that, so we'll keep it B for now. Next up, Eugenius. This was so much fun. I think that the best thing about Eugenius is just sort of how seriously it doesn't take itself. Like having Evil Lord Hector running up and down the stairs with a smoke machine kind of concealed inside his or their, I think, kind of trousery capey thing. It was wonderful. I loved that it recognized the fact that goofing around wasn't gonna detract from the show in any way. And it was at the Turbine, and it's so small scale, but you can really tell that all the cast are having a great time and enjoying themselves. And the fact that there are sort of super fans in the audience, like I was there with one girl that was dressed in full-on superhero outfit. She committed to it 100%. That also endears me more to a show because I'm like, oh man, this is clearly really connected with these people because it's become such a big part of their identity, and that's awesome. So I think Eugenius is going in A tier for me. It's not something that I can imagine wanting to see a lot more times. Like Dear Evan, I could see multiple times and be completely happy. Bonnie, I already have done. Heather's, same thing. HadesTown, I'd need to be in the right mood. Come From Away is the sort of thing that I would want as many other people I know to go see as possible just because it would be so wholesome for them, and I would still see it repeatedly. But Eugenius, maybe ever so slightly less, but I would still happily go back and see that show once again and hopefully see some other folks trying out different parts and things like that. That would be really cool. Now for Newsies. Newsies. I went to see you in previews and my little cotton socks were blown off. I thought this show was incredible, just perfection, with one simple caveat, and that's that the sound, once again, wasn't great. It's just part and parcel with appearing at the Troubadour, that Wembley Park Theatre, because the venue itself just doesn't have the best acoustics, and when I can hear a character speaking on stage because the sound is coming out of their mouth, but there is a delay between that sound and the sound that's being projected out into the auditorium by the speaker system, when I can hear that separation, that double tracking, it's going to ruin a show, right? But Newsies is so magical that even with that issue and not being able to understand certain lines, and having posted my video talking about that problem, and having so many people to this day saying, yeah, I just saw Newsies like a week ago and I'm blown away by it and I loved it and I agree with everything that you said that was positive, but I also do agree that the sound issue is really frustrating and unfortunate because that cast and that crew, they deserve so much better. It just happens to be in an unfortunately large room at the Wembley Park Troubadour Theatre. So I know that this is an ongoing issue, it's not just me, but even so, I loved it so much, and the dancing and the choreography is so superb. It's going in S. So in theory, we have our S tier filled up, but perhaps one of these little contenders down here could come in to upset the balance a little bit. So let's take And Juliet first. And Juliet for me was fine. The first time I saw it was significantly better than the second time, I felt like. Actually, wait, no, I saw it 3 times because I saw it on closing night as well. And it was really great, but it's not an S for me. But I don't think it's at B. I think it's at sort of like B.5. It's a jukebox musical, and I'm not as big into jukebox musicals as I am into musicals written to be musicals. So if you'll allow me, I'm going to kind of sandwich it between A and B tier here, because I don't think I would put it in the category of like Illegally, for instance, but also at the same time, And J is a slight notch down for me compared to something like Heathers or Dear Evan. Next up, Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cinderella. Next up, Cabaret. You know what? I'm going to talk about it a little bit. Carrie Hope Fletcher, and I mean everyone involved in the cast for the West End staging of Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cinderella deserved so much better. And especially one of the, I'm not sure if it was just one of the ensemble or one of the covers, or I'm not sure. On the day I saw the show, he got to take on the role of, if I recall correctly, whatever the other prince is, not Prince Charming, because Prince Charming's the one that kind of comes in towards the end, right, and upsets the balance of things. So not that one. The other prince, the main kind of prince in the show, it was his first night doing it, I found out afterwards, and he was so good in the role. But I mean, Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cinderella is Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cinderella. And that man, he's just not got it right with this one. He's not in touch, clearly. I hate the pacing, the cadence of the dialogue. I hate the way that the words land within the songs and the nature of the rhymes, and just, it was just bad. It was just bad. I don't know what he was thinking. I don't know how it's still going on Broadway right now. The cast deserves better. It's not their fault. I'm not sure it's even overrated, to be honest, because no one's rating this thing. It's overrated if you're listening to Andrew Lloyd Webber read out his snotty little letter about how people have been so mean about the show and we shouldn't listen to critics or something. I don't even know. Ridiculous. It's overrated. Yeah. Just cancel the thing. Book of Mormon. Tons of fun, tons of bangers, tons of energy and laughs as well. I think, I'm not sure, has this one aged a little wonkily over the last couple of years? Maybe a teeny tiny bit. But at the same time, that's sort of the point. That's always been the point with it. That said, I would gladly see Mormon again at the drop of a hat. It is just so much fun. I mean, after all, it's God's favorite musical, so we're going to tuck Mormon in here. And finally, Cabaret, which has won loads of awards. It's got 5-star reviews. It's just sort of loved overall, I think, by everyone in the West End. But for me, Cabaret was an odd experience because I've always seen from the outside, Cabaret, I've perceived it to be an inattainable show. I've always sort of had the feeling with it that like it's sold out, or it's really hard to get tickets, or it's more expensive. And I've entered the lottery on TodayTix so many times and I've never won it. And so when I did finally get the chance to see it, I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is the moment. I'm really hyped up for this. And I hadn't really looked into what Cabaret actually was. And I'm an idiot. And I kind of got Cabaret a bit mixed up with Chicago. So I was expecting something very different to what I actually got. And I think it's brilliant. It just wasn't the sort of S-tier extravaganza that I thought it was going to be. Still really fantastic. And some of the moments in it, like when the host clown dude stamps on the ground and it makes that smashing noise, and just like those sorts of, oh God, really, really brutal imagery, and something that has stayed with me, clearly. But we're talking about the experience I had on the day. And with Cabaret, there were 3 women with a bottle of wine from the very beginning of the show. And I think that this is a slight problem with what Cabaret does with the pre-show. The fact that they give everyone, peach schnapps or something? Like they give you a drink as you enter the building and you're made to feel like that's the vibe, right? And I love that. It's interactive theater. It's playing with the boundary between audience and cast. And that's really cool. But I think just in terms of audience psychology, and maybe this is worse post-COVID because I feel like everything is worse post-COVID. But I think in some ways, it gives people the impression that they're actually going to that club and they can let their hair down and just be a bit rude to everyone else around them. And so these 3 women, bottle of wine from the very beginning of the show, they were talking through the whole thing, and there would be some really heart-wrenching stuff happening and they would be talking through it. Or there'd be a really sad moment where like this Jewish guy is being persecuted and they'd be like sort of laughing to themselves. It was awful. And it was so awful to the point that my experience of the show was really diminished in a massive way. And I went up to them at the end and I was like, I just want to let you guys know that I thought you were really rude throughout this. And they were like, we weren't talking. No one said we were talking. You made it up. And then I'm walking out of the building and they're calling me a dickhead behind my back. Like, what's going on there? It's obviously not Cabaret's fault, but I wonder in situations like that if there could maybe be some kind of increased effort to make sure that you're not serving alcohol to people that are already drunk, or just generally trying to ensure and encourage the audience to still behave themselves enough such that they don't disrupt the enjoyment of other people watching the show. I don't really understand it. Maybe this is a topic for another video, but I don't really understand why theatre etiquette feels like it's diminishing so rapidly right now. Like we've just had the bodyguard incident a little while ago where people were singing along in the theatre. Like, what's going on there? And I feel like there needs to be some thought put into how theatres and productions can just try and minimize those things. But still, Cabaret was fantastic. I think that for me personally, based on that experience alone, again, same deal as what I'm doing with Hamilton here, I think I'd put it at B tier. I would love to go see it again, but I also do get along better with musicals where I can really get into the music. Like Cabaret's almost not a musical in my mind. It's almost more of a play. It's a weird one. It sits in weird territory, as does HadesTown in its own different way. But yeah, maybe it's sort of here. Maybe it's at the B plus 0.5. It's halfway to A. I enjoyed it. I think I'd enjoy it a lot more the second time I went because those women won't be there, hopefully. So that's my ranking. How much do you hate my opinions? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you'd like me to do this for just straight plays that I've seen, not musicals, then I absolutely could do. Just leave a like and let me know. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.